Welcome to Spilling the Tea, the podcast where we dive deep into the cutting edge of confidential computing and AI. I'm Lisa Lau from Secret Network, and I will be your host today. This isn't your typical podcast. Here, we explore the real tech that's shaping the next wave of Web3, from zero-knowledge proofs and trusted execution environments to the frontier of privacy-preserving machine learning. Today, I'm excited to have our guest. Our guest is Bruce Ahn, who is currently the Chief of Staff at Partisia Blockchain Foundation, a nonprofit that's dedicated to the advancement and adoption of a unique cryptographic protocol called multi-party computation, or MPC, which enables multiple parties to collaborate and compute an output together without sharing the underlying input data between themselves. So as long as they don't collude, they don't need to collude, they don't need to talk to each other, they just need to sign multi-party computation and the cryptography is preserved. So with over 20 years experience in the traditional finance industry, Bruce is focusing on systems and network architecture and design, and is now dedicated in furthering the adoption of MPC. Bruce, we're really happy to have you on the show today, and would you like to get a chance to just introduce yourself briefly, and then can you explain confidential computing in a single sentence for listeners who are new to the show?
So first of all, Lisa, thanks for the invitation. Super excited to be here to talk about just confidential computing, just overall in general. Yeah. So yes, I have close to 25 years of experience in the enterprise side of things, mostly in network architecture, systems and network architecture, and also with managing development teams, and also as a delivery lead. And then I moved over into the Web3 side of things about 4 years ago, and excited about the maturation of the space and bringing in technologies like confidential computing that I believe is going to help mature the space. And so you're gonna start off with what I think is probably one of the toughest questions that I myself have been asking myself. How can you describe what seems like it's magic? How do you compute or prove without really showing the proof or showing the input values itself? So I have a couple of things that I want to run by you, and I want to hear your opinion as well. Which one resonates with you? So the first one sentence that I could use to describe confidential computing is it enables using your data at full potential. So that's one. The other one that I was kind of thinking about was uh, giving only the use of your data and not the data itself. The other one that I like is it enables uh, collaboration without compromise, because it allows for collaboration between multiple different people without compromising their privacy. And maybe the last one is a trust without giving trust. So it enables uh, Yeah, it enables trust between entities without needing to disclose and giving trust to somebody by exposing your underlying data itself.
Right.
Which one
I
do you like
think
the best?
I really like collaboration without compromise, and the reason I like it is that it sounds I mean, when you think about interacting with people, you're always compromising, right? Like, for example, I get an invitation from a journalist to give an interview, right? And immediately I think, do I want to spend my time figuring out if this is legit or not? Or do I just want to say this is probably a scam, forget it? So right there, I'm already making a compromise because I don't know for sure if that person is legit. And I think compromises come in at every step of the process, in every interaction. I use that one because it's deliberately not a financial transaction. I think we're always compromising. Either we're compromising on where we spend our energy or we're compromising on our safety. Because I might say, I don't care if he's real or not, I'm just going to go ahead. Or I might say, let me go run it by security and find out if this is a legit person, if this is really the person. Let me email CoinDesk and ask, is this really one of your journalists? Like, those are all compromises because they all take my energy and my time to verify something. And that's just a very tip of the iceberg. You can imagine all sorts of other compromises you make when you don't know if you can collaborate with someone or not.
That makes perfect sense. And you mentioning safety, I think that's a great example. I'm thinking about an example. Maybe we have a chance to go over that in a little bit later. But yeah, I think that makes sense. Collaboration without compromise. I think that does resonate quite well.
Yeah, I like that one. So, if just make sure you credit me in your next marketing campaign.
You got it. You got it. Absolutely. Your name will be right
So,
on there.
moving on to more, maybe more technical content, what makes multi-party computation different from other privacy technologies like zero knowledge proofs, for example?
So I think there's a lot of different types of technologies that's out there from a confidential computing technology. Of course, there's TEE, but then you also have zero knowledge proof, fully homomorphic encryption. You have differential privacy, garble circuits, and so on and so forth. And I think that's the beauty of confidential computing. Each technology serves like a small different purpose. It's got a different use case, and in many cases, it actually complements each other. I think Lisa, you and I spoke about the collaboration between TE and MPC and where that kind of fits in, and that's what I think is really attractive about the various different confidential computing technologies that's out there. So if we just take zero knowledge proof as an example and compare that with MPC, a zero knowledge proof, of course, at a high level is a proof system. It's right there in the name, zero knowledge proof. And the answers are always going to be, it's in binary. A proof is just either yes or no. You either prove it yes or you prove that it's no. And that's what zero knowledge proof is. Multi-party computation, on the other hand, it actually, again, right in the word, multi-party computation, it provides actual computed answers while keeping the inputs secret. And so the applications are a little bit different. I think a really simple example is like, let's say I have a number in mind, and Lisa, you have a number in mind, and we want to prove that if we add our numbers together, the answer is 7. And I don't want to share what my number is. Lisa, you don't want to share your number. Maybe my number is -5, and your number is +13, or so on and so forth. So it's a proof. We're proving that yes or no, the answer when you add those two numbers up is 7. With MBC, you're actually computing the answer. So we're not sharing what our numbers are, but you can compute the numbers together without sharing it, and come up with that the answer is 7. And so, for simple proofs, without the need for an infrastructure, you can use ZK proof. It doesn't, but if you need to use computation, if you want to get to an actual answer and you want to scale that to maybe 10,000 people, 100,000 people, then you really need to kind of consider something like MPC or TEE and those kinds of technologies.
Right.
Well, yeah.
I guess in the case of 2 people, if you give the total 7 and I know that I have 13, I know then I'm gonna figure out that you have -5. But if you have 3 people, which multi-party can do, then I don't know what your number is, and I don't know what the other person's number is. There's enough uncertainty there.
Yeah, exactly. And when I first heard about this, and maybe we get a chance to talk about it a little bit later, but when I first heard about this, it just sounded like magic. And then once you dig down deep into it, it's really about mathematics.
Right. Isn't everything, though? Like, music is ultimately mathematics. Physics is I studied math, so I'm a little bit biased. I'm
No,
a
you're right.
mathematician.
Yeah, music is very mathematical in
Mhm.
nature. Yeah, you're absolutely
Yeah,
right.
and rhythm and everything and all the things that we're discovering. I think this is a very relevant topic that you're bringing up, the way that these technologies can work together because as you may have heard, there's been some vulnerabilities uncovered in TEEs. And so as a foundational technology, it may not be the technology that you wanna base everything on, but, um, but TEEs do have certain advantages, and maybe rather than building everything on one technology, maybe we see where FHE is most useful, where MPC is most useful, where ZK is most useful, and where TEs are most useful. I think we're starting to evolve towards more of using each of these cryptographic technologies for what they're strong at, rather than as the sole solution. Would you agree
Yeah,
with that?
absolutely agree. Um, it goes with the maturation of service, and I think it's really about the evolution of the industry itself, where you're going to need variety of different tools, just like how in like Web 1 and Web 2, you needed to have multiple different types of tools to help protect you from attacks or various different security issues. So you have things like VPN, you have things like adware detection, antivirus, and you have all of these different technologies that help all put together give you that complete security package. So
Mhm.
absolutely agree.
That is a good analogy, I like that. I hadn't thought of that before, but it really makes sense. You're not gonna say, "Oh, I have adware, so I don't need any, antivirus on my computer." Obviously, different services, different purposes.
Yeah, exactly.
So how does Partisia's blockchain integrate MPC into your public L1, layer 1 blockchain without sacrificing scalability?
Yeah, and I think for those listeners who are well aware of the blockchain space, scalability, of course, is a very hot topic. I'll say. Um, so we actually had to create two unique technological advancements on our side to ensure that our MPC can really scale at the speed and the number of users that we wanted to support. The first is what we call a true sharding. And for those who are a little bit more tech savvy on the EVM side of things, you know that a blockchain generally consists of a single blockchain, and this is one of the limiting factors, a bottleneck, so to speak, because you can't distribute out the workload of a single blockchain because again, you just have that one blockchain. One blockchain means you're always producing one block at a time. No matter how fast you're able to produce that block, you're still producing one block at a time. So we recognize that as one of the architectural bottlenecks. And so on our chain, what we actually built out was the ability to have multiple blockchains running in parallel. So when you hear Partisia blockchain, it's actually multiple different blockchains running in parallel, working together, and each individual blockchains producing blocks in parallel. So
Yeah,
we can,
before Does
yeah,
that make sense? So before you touch on the other solution that you've implemented, I just want to ask a little bit about you called it true sharding. Can you explain why it's called true sharding, and is there other types
yeah.
of sharding?
Yeah, that's a I love that question, because the word sharding, actually comes from a database technology. It's not a blockchain technology. A lot of the younger folks heard sharding and they're thinking, "Oh, it's a blockchain technology. It's a new technology." The word sharding actually comes from the 1990s, from a video game called Ultima Online. So that video game was a massively multiplayer role playing game. I think some of the listeners may know things like World of Warcraft and those kinds of things. Ultima Online was like a predecessor to that. And they had a major challenge where there was just too many players trying to play the game at the same time, where a single database couldn't handle the load. So they had to figure out how do you distribute that out. And so they created a technology called sharding in a database. And in fact, if you ask a database administrator, they'll know what that is. A SQL database, the DB2. They'll, yeah, I know what sharding is. It's just basically distributing multiple different databases and using a messaging protocol to synchronize the state between different databases, technically. Um, and so that's where the origination of the word sharding comes from.
And are they full copies, or are they, like,
No,
is each one like a mirror, sort of a mirror of the other?
no. Each database holds different information.
Oh,
And so
okay. I
when
see.
yeah, yeah. So if you kind of think of it from a blockchain perspective, let's say I have an account and then Lisa, you have an account in a traditional EVM. In that one blockchain, my account and your account lives in that blockchain. But if you use true sharding, in the same way, same architected way in the sharding in the database side, my account could live on shard one, and Lisa, your account could live on shard two. And when I send transactions from my account to your account, there's a messaging protocol that runs between the blockchain to synchronize the state between each other. And that's how they synchronize the state. That's how it's done in the database sharding. And we're basically taking that architecture and layering that in a
Makes sense.
blockchain state.
Wow, okay. That makes sense. So, to avoid the double spend, obviously, you have to have good, messaging protocol between the
Yeah,
chains. And
exactly.
I guess that's is that a vulnerability area, or is that, well documented because of the history of database technology?
It's baked into our consensus mechanism. So one of the advantages of being a cryptography organization or cryptography foundation like Partisia Blockchain is that we have access to these cryptographic solutions. And so our oracle that manages the consensus layer is actually protected by our MPC. And so our oracle key is sharded into all of the different nodes that are running the environment. And so we that is one of our unique features in our consensus mechanism, where it makes it incredibly secure, and I would say it's impossible to kind of break through that.
Right. Makes sense. Alright, cool. What did you wanna talk about the other customization?
Oh, yeah, thanks for reminding me. So the other customization was with our MPC protocol, and that's actually baked directly into our smart contract language. We call it REAL, REAL, and it's based on the work by our chief cartographer Ivan Damgard, and it is the first and, as far as I know, the only smart contract language that allows the customization of the confidential computing technology that you want to do. So many of the listeners may know and have heard MPC before, but there's many different techniques of MPC, and what you generally see with MPC, things like MPC wallets, as an example, is basically what's called secret sharing. It's being able to validate the multiple different shards that are out there, the data shards that are out there. With our MPC, you can do multiple different types of computations. In fact, all of the binary and arithmetic computations we support, and so you can actually customize the MPC computation through the smart contract language to tackle far more complicated problems such as healthcare data and things like fraud detection and so on and so forth.
Amazing, okay. Makes sense. Can you give a real world example where confidential computing makes a big difference today? Not just theoretical, but where it's actually being used?
I really like this question because every time we talk about, I think, confidential computing, we always talk about vision and how important it is, but we never really come down to the real world use cases. So I'll talk about two really cool use cases that we're working on right now. One big example is the work that we're doing with the Danish government. We're working with two Danish government agencies. One is called the Danish Health Authority, and the other is called the Statistica Denmark. One holds healthcare data for all Danish citizens, and the other holds socioeconomic information for the Danish citizens for the last 80 years. And these two data sets are number one, very, very confidential, of course. And number two, they have very strict controls and governance rules around how and what information can be shared. And I think this kind of problem actually is relatable to many different countries. You have multiple different laws. I think HIPAA is the law in the U.S., which is extremely um, uh, it's difficult. I'll say, and when a research analyst that works for a pharmaceutical company, as an example, wants access to the data for research, the data has to be secured, and then it has to be anonymized, and it has to be put into a system with strict audit, accountability, data cleanup rules, and so on and so forth. And that's how, even in Denmark, of course, that's how things needed to get done. And the cost of setting all of that up when a researcher asked for that set of data was over 100,000 euros per data set. But even worse, the lead time to get access to that data because of all of those different governance rules that are out there was 9 months or more. Just before an analyst was able to gain
Almost
access to that
very
data.
unwieldy.
Very difficult. Um, and what we're doing with MBC is allowing the computation of the data again, the computation of the data without needing to
Oh, I see.
expose that
Mhm.
data. And
That's
so,
very cool.
yeah, and so we're able to reduce that cost from 100,000 to just 10,000 per data set. But to me, more importantly, the lead time to gain access to that data, reducing that from 9 months to just 1 week.
1 week, down
Yeah,
from 9 months. That's pretty incredible.
yeah.
Um,
And the impact of this isn't just the operational cost. This impacts research time to bring in new medications to the market, new therapies to be validated, and so on and so forth. So there's an incredible amount of impact to it.
I know Denmark's one of their biggest exports is medicine, because they're very strong in research. Actually, my cousin lives in Denmark, and she works in the health industry. She works as a researcher finding new pharmaceuticals. So I'm kind of familiar with that. But I'm interested. It's very interesting that it's Denmark that is leading there. Denmark, as you may know, has once again um, made it to the top of the list for 2025 of the happiest places in the world to live. But it's not so easy to live there if you're not a Danish citizen, I can tell you that.
Yeah,
But
yes.
but it's very interesting because they are also, leading in real world use cases for using MPC and cryptographic knowledge on blockchains. I did
Yeah.
not know that.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. The second use case that perhaps we can go over is around and again, this is a real world example. This is what we're working on right now, is around biometric hashes, protecting your biometric hashes. And we're working with a large Japanese company called Token Edge, who's working to convert student IDs, physical student IDs, to a digital form. And they're using biometric face scans to verify students in the universities. And when you think about like face scans, ability to scan somebody's face and identify them, the first thing I think about is like Jason Bourne, to the deep state, to government surveillance, and so on and so forth. Um, and so how can you develop a system that allows for facial verification and so on and so forth without, again, exposing the biometric hash that gets generated as a part of the scan itself, because when you scan the face, it creates a hash through the algorithm. And so we're working with Token to enable the security of the face scan itself, so that you're still able to verify that person while keeping the biometric hash secured and private.
Mhm. That's interesting. I mean, I guess it doesn't prevent Big Brother from watching you, but it prevents perhaps all the people who work at Big Brother from knowing exactly what you look like.
So certainly that, but the other application to that is that you can actually verify without needing to identify yourself. So as an example, if you need entry into a building door, you can do the scan, protect that your identity, but still be able to verify that this facial hash is allowed access into the building. So there's multiple different ways of kind of protecting your privacy. That's the incredible part about these confidential computing technologies.
Right. I would love it if hotels in Europe, stopped asking me for my passport and allowed me to just verify myself through some encrypted way that doesn't require me to share them to take a photocopy of my of my actual passport. It's kinda crazy when you think of how the world actually works today.
I think that's a great business idea, Lisa.
Mhm.
We gotta talk about this.
Okay, let's talk. Well, what role do you see confidential computing playing in the future of, let's say, DeFi or Web3 in general, more broadly?
Yeah, and I think we touched upon this I think earlier, where I was kind of drawing analogies to the evolution of Web 1 and then Web 2 and how it involved. Um, so 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 Web 1 when it first began, it was I was in my very early 20s. I was just getting my career going, and I remember because my initial job was to actually bring these companies, and give them access into the internet. And so I remember what the spirit of Web 1 was. I was right there in the thick of it. Web 1 was really about allowing, access and to be able to publish data freely, that there was no central entity that controlled access to the information, and that information can freely flow. I can spin up a web server and post whatever I want, whatever information that I wanted to post freely and have it accessible to everyone, connected to the internet. It's in many ways it's similar to some of the principles and visions of Web 3. Um, and so that's what really Web 1 was. It had the same spirit, and changed how we consume data. So it changed how we consume data. Anyone had the ability to publish their data, right? Um, and I remember I remember back then everybody, wow, this is amazing. This is gonna bring utopia, and it's going to create a new world. And in a way, it did, but probably not in the same utopian way that a lot of people initially thought.
Well, we used to I in back then, I think a common expression was information is power, and that's true to a certain extent when information is limited, but once information becomes unlimited, then misinformation also becomes unlimited, and I guess we didn't information is not pure information is not pure power, or knowledge is not power. We need to have more we had to build more scaffolding around that knowledge
Yeah.
after it was unlimitedly available,
Yeah,
in a
I think
sense.
that's a great point because we're beginning to see something similar with Web 3, where everybody thought full transparency is going to bring this ability to
Yeah.
trust everything, and then we're beginning to realize, well, actually,
Mhm.
so on and so forth, right?
Yeah, actually, there's
Um,
some downsides that come with
uh,
that.
yeah, exactly. And so from a Web 1 perspective, I think you had, these malicious activities. You had people poking holes into the servers, hacking into it, and then changing the information, stealing data, and so on and so forth. And we talked a little bit about this before. I think and then we came up with, new technology, new solutions, new industry, for security, tools to monitor, protect, and validate access. And so Web 1 evolved, to Web 2, where it moved away from consuming of data and to the interaction of data now. So things like Twitter, things like or X, things like YouTube, where now you're interacting with data. And then of course for that we had to figure out. additional security tools around that. So things like, I think we talked about it, VPNs, ad blockers, incognito mode is a great, example of adding additional privacy. Regulatory rules that govern how data are used began to evolve, and so on and so forth. Um, and so that alongside that, and I'll get to the Web3 part. I know I'm being long-winded here, but I'll get to the Web3 part.
I'm tracking.
Along
Mhm.
yeah, tracking and so on and so forth. That really
No,
gave,
I mean, I'm tracking you. It's really interesting, the Web
uh
1, Web 2, Web 3 of evolution.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, talking about tracking, that was the other industry that came out, which was around, companies like Google, Facebook, tracking your activities on site. So the first thing that pops up when you go to a website is, "Hey, we use cookies. Do you consent
Right.
to accepting these cookies?"
Mhm.
Well,
Inconceivable in Web 1, right?
yeah, it was
Or
completely
before Web 1
inconceivable.
even. Yeah.
Right, yeah. And so Web 2, Web 1 was about consuming data, Web 2 is about interacting with data, and as a part of that, you were giving your data away. Web 3 is now really about actually gaining that ownership back of that data itself. The account that you have on a blockchain is yours. It's not the bank's, but it's yours. It's your data. You control it. You control what you send, what you receive, and so on and so forth. And that now requires, in my mind, different sets of tools for the individual to be able to secure their own data. And just like Web 1, just like Web 2, Web 3 requires additional tools, tools that can help secure the data at source. And that's what I believe confidential computing really brings to the table, and that's the role that it plays. It becomes a necessity, and so um, so it really brings trust to a trustless system. That's how I like to kind of think about it. And to tie it into DeFi, that you want to be able to trust that the DeFi system is not allowing other people to front run you, or to publicize your trade, and make sure that it's also compliant. So you want to bring trust to the DeFi system, and in order for you to do that, you have to have uh, some type of confidential computing technology around it.
Yeah, so it's just the evolution of what we need now in order to, cope with the advancement in technology.
Right, yeah, exactly.
So you have over 20 years, and you said 25, so I'll say 25, in traditional finance. What lessons can you carry over from that vast experience into designing blockchain systems?
Um, wow, 25 years, 20 years, yeah. So so maybe we can begin with things like the dot-com bubble, which I was a big part of. I remember, um, in the late '90s, early 2000, I was designing data networks, so connecting large companies to the internet, securing it, and I was part of that evolution that moved from, the infancy of the internet all the way to what it is that we know today. And back then, everything was transparent, just like how it is in the blockchain right now. Everything was transparent. Everything was HTTP. Everyone can see what people were accessing. When we connected to the internet, I had a public address. My servers had a public address, and it was available directly to the internet. And then we talked a little bit about it. Additional industries came up where required security, required protection, it required privacy. You began to see things like firewalls. You began to see things like network address translations, DMZs. You've heard the term intranet before. I'm sure everybody has heard the term intranet before. It's the private network that is protecting the private companies, but still being able to allow access to the internet with the protection. And I think this is a natural evolution of any kind of data, exchange infrastructure, a revolutionary data exchange infrastructure. You begin with an infrastructure that is completely transparent, and then you begin to layer additional security features as the industry matures. And so to me, my question is, what is what does security mean? What does privacy mean in the context of and the principles of Web3? And we talked a little bit about it. Web 2 really was about interacting with data. Web 1 was about accessing data. Web 3 really is about um, ownership of your own data. And in order for you to secure the data at the source, you need different types of technologies out there, and that's what confidential computing brings. It allows you to um, secure your data that is under your control. And so to go back to answering your question, I think what lessons carry over from my experience. I think my experience shows that maturity of any technology goes from transparency to a privacy-based, secure-based infrastructure, and that you have to bake that into the design of the system. You have to think about that when you're designing it. When you're designing a blockchain, you have to think about privacy and security. It has to be embedded into the architecture and the process around the system. And that will be my advice.
Mhm. You mentioned the dot-com bubble, and, what I've been thinking about lately is how, uh, it is very similar. I do see a lot of similarities. What I see is that we have, bright minds thinking about new problems and coming up with solutions as though it's the first time, which is great. I mean, there's nothing new under the sun. We know that, and we know that we keep reinventing the wheel, to use a cliche. But what I think is so amazing about this conversation and about your work at Partisia is that you've seen these things before, and so it doesn't necessarily need to be a big discovery. The fact that we do need to secure our data and protect our privacy and do it by design from the beginning. I think the advantage of having the experience that you have means that you don't have to make a lot of false starts. You can get to the solution more quickly and without necessarily having to discover something new. So, I mean, it's exciting to discover new things, but it's better to do it faster.
So I'm gonna quote you on that and send that over to my boss and say, "Hey, see? You see?"
Exactly. Well,
So,
have him give
yeah,
me a call.
I'll do that, thank you.
So we touched on a little bit of interoperability when we were talking about sharding. But interoperability is kind of a bigger topic and bigger buzzword right now, and we're seeing a lot of meta layers on chains now that allow interaction between the chains. So can you talk a little bit about what interoperability means in the context of Partisia?
Yeah, I mean, I'll talk about it just in the context of Web3, overall, because I think we're part and parcel of it. Again, forgive me, but I'll take the analogy of the internet again. So to me, a blockchain should be an infrastructure. I think, in fact, a lot of people will say, yeah, it's an infrastructure. But if we look at an infrastructure, it has to be interoperable. So I'll give an example. Like, here I am. I'm sitting in my room using my ISP and connecting to the internet. Lisa, you're connected to your ISP, and you're connecting to the internet. Man, it doesn't really matter what ISP I use. I'm still connected to the internet, and we're able to have this conversation. We can exchange data. But if I log in to my ISP of Partisia Blockchain, and Lisa, you log in, with your ISP of Secret Network, we're not going to be able to talk to each other. And that's the biggest challenge, I think, with Web3, is just the fragmentation of these blockchains that consider themselves as infrastructure, but they really can't talk to each other.
Yeah, it's a great analogy. It's a great way of framing it.
Yeah, and that's the biggest challenge, I think. And so there's a lot of things that are being done with bridging, and there's a lot of things that are being done with other technologies that's trying to kind of bridge everything together. But there's no standard. Everything is kind of like a hit or miss. Or you could do it from one network to another, but not to another network. You can't do it from a Rust network to an to a Solidity, and so on and so forth. So it's still a significant challenge, and that's not what we wanted our MPC to be like, our MPC technology. We wanted it to be interoperable. We wanted it to be usable by everybody. And so the foundation is a nonprofit. That's the reason why it is a nonprofit. We want to deliver our MPC number one to be free, so that anybody can use it. So it is open source. It is a free technology that you can build your solutions on, and we also have created multiple delivery systems. For that technology, you can build your solutions using our MPC technology on top of our blockchain. You can run it on a different blockchain, any blockchain that you wish, or you can even run it off chain. And I think that's how it really needs to be for interoperability and adoption. If we're going to have an infrastructure that the entire world can use,
Hmm.
that's the philosophy that I think you really need to have.
Okay, makes sense. So, can you just dive a little bit deeper into how that works, like how you are solving that problem?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So as I mentioned, we have the smart contract language, which bakes in the MPC technology in there. So you could write a smart contract on Partisia Blockchain, where um, you can build these MPC solutions on top of the Partisia Blockchain itself. That's building on top of Partisia blockchain. And then we have a interoperable bridge as well, where we accept multiple different types of tokens as gas payments, so that if another blockchain wanted to use our technology, you could use that bridge and connect just to use our MPC as a service, and take that information and bring it back to their native chain, and make it look like as if the computation is actually happening on the native chain itself. We also have, oh yeah, but there's more. We also have, yeah, yeah, we also have something called the execution engine, which is a off-chain network where you can run a off-chain computation, multi-party computation system yourself. And again, it's open source. You can just download it and run it in a server somewhere, and it'll do the multi-party computation. And the way you connect to it is just through a simple API, a REST service call. And the computation, the logs to verify that the computation was done properly, and there was no adversary in the mix. All of that gets logged on the blockchain, so the back end of it goes down to the blockchain to allow for a non off chain type of a system as well.
Very cool. Very small footprint, modularized, easy to use.
Yeah,
Like
exactly.
it.
That's great. I like that. I'm going to take that. I'm going to put it into our marketing.
That's just distilling what you said. So, but just to widen our view for a second, I'm gonna level up to DCC, which is decentralized confidential computing,
Yeah.
and ask you a question, which you may or may not be expecting, which is how does DCC, just for our audience, like off the wall, how does it differ from the broader idea of DeFi, so decentralized finance, decentralized confidential computing
Mm.
versus decentralized finance?
That reminds me of the conversation that we were having, unintended consequences, where when you build a particular technology, uh, you're going to have unintended consequences. I think what's the phrase? Um, no good deed goes unpunished. Maybe that's what it is. And so DeFi is really about to provide a way to have a system that is not really controlled by a centralized entity, permissionless, accessible to anybody, transparent and trustable. Again, the word trustable. And I think again, hindsight is 2020, and people will find different ways to use the system. And I think one of the big thing is front running. Front running is something that I think maybe a lot of the Web3 listeners may know from a Web3 perspective. But front running is a very old old problem.
Yeah.
Even in the traditional stock market,
Hmm.
the financial systems, and it was in the traditional sense, it was because they had private data.
Right.
They
Insider
had
information.
insider information, exactly. These politicians get insider information, and they're able to do the trades earlier than the people, and it's because they have these private insider information before the rest of the public. Clearly unethical, and illegal. It is illegal.
In
Uh,
traditional finance, yeah,
yeah, yeah. In traditional finance, it is illegal.
because of the asymmetry of information and access to information, I
Yeah,
guess.
yeah. But in DeFi, everything is transparent. Everybody knows everything. And the funny thing is that the same problem actually can manifest because you know that there's front running happening
All the
in
time.
DeFi all the
Mhm.
time. And that's because there's too much transparency.
Right.
Yeah, which is
Right.
really funny when you really look at it. I
That's
always
a good
find it
point.
very amusing. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, and so and so,
So where's the asymmetry then? I mean, if you can front running is all about asymmetry, right? It's someone has an advantage, and so they act earlier than other people. Um, and so where's the asymmetry with total transparency? I think it has to be in technical aptitude, the
yeah,
ability to sniff something out quickly
yeah, yeah,
through
exactly.
bots.
Yeah, through bots, people who are technically savvy, who can build something to look into the system to gain that information. You've heard the term map pools before.
Yeah,
Looking at the memory pool
maximum
and
extractable value.
yeah, yeah, you're looking at the memory pool in a Ethereum node, and you're saying, ah, I see somebody who is putting in an order for this amount of money for this kind of a price, and
Right.
this is the amount of gas that they put in. I can go ahead of that by putting in a different order with a higher gas to go ahead of this trade and get a
Mhm.
better value, make him
Right.
get a less value, and then sell afterwards to take the profit.
Right. Yeah. I've
Yeah.
been a victim of MEV bots, so,
Yo,
um, yeah,
I think a lot of people probably have been a victim without even realizing it,
without
unfortunately.
realizing, yeah, why didn't I
Yeah,
get as much as I thought I was gonna get? Or why did that trade end up in the negative? Well, it's because of someone front ran you.
exactly. And
So,
so
yeah, I think it's interesting there has to be a balance, right, between privacy and anonymity and transparency.
yeah.
Is that what
And
you're
I yeah, I think we talked a little bit about it before. Um, a trust, has to be built with a balance of both between a balance of between privacy and transparency. And I think that's why confidential computing has to be a core element of any DeFi system that wants to be compliant, that wants to be trustable,
Mhm,
ultimately in the end.
right. Yeah, Shade protocol built on Secret is one of the few, DeFi systems that has encryption built in so that it doesn't have full transparency. But then there are other ways of doing it, like, using MEV pools or being proof against them. Anyway, that's a little bit of a rabbit hole that I won't get into completely, although I would be fascinated by it because it's all math. But let me ask you, what are the biggest challenges to adoption of MPC in general, and how is Partisia approaching those?
I think adoption is something that all of the people working on confidential computing probably can relate with. Um, to me, it's really about I'll say awareness to begin with, and I think it's because it completely changes how we interact with data. Um, One of the example that I use is around consent. And we talked about the cookies before. When you go into a website, the first thing that comes up is a question about consent. Do you consent to accepting these cookies that will be used for these kinds of purposes? And that's basically because you're giving away your data, and they want consent so that you can't sue them later saying that, hey, you used my data for whatever that wasn't what I agreed to. And again, goes back to the concept of, Web2 giving away your data. With MPC and broadly with confidential computing, it allows you uh, to compute on that data without giving that away. So it changes the context of consent. One of the things that it does is changes the concept of consent, because you're no longer giving your data away. You're no longer giving the information that the cookies are asking for. Uh, yeah, and so what does that mean from a consent perspective? Does that mean that you no longer need to give consent, or perhaps you're consenting now only to the use of your data? Um, and so things like regulators really need to be aware of this technology, and they have to help answer the question around things like consent. And just like how Web2 evolved regulatory compliance, regulatory rules, that also has to happen as Web MPC and confidential computing, begins to become adopted. So one of our biggest focus is to understand regulatory and work with the regulatory bodies, so that we can work on things like healthcare data, so that we can work on things like financial fraud, because those are incredibly sensitive data. And so, yeah, so regulatory change, compliance, building a platform that can support all of these different things is gonna be a very important factor for adoption, in my view.
Yeah.
And yeah,
Yeah, I
it's
think you're right.
one of our bigger focus. Yeah.
If you don't know how to implement it, it's very hard to do it compliantly.
Yeah. Yeah,
You
exactly.
don't know what the rules are, how do you follow
Yeah.
them?
Yeah, yeah.
All right, to wrap it up, if you want someone to remember one thing about confidential computing after this episode, what should it be?
Uh, um, have you watched the movie Matrix? The movie?
Yes,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
that
yeah.
movie.
So there's a scene where, Agent Smith says to Neo,
Mhm.
he always says, "It's inevitable, Mr. Anderson."
Mhm.
I don't know if you remember that line,
Yes.
but that's like one of the theme that happens, ultimately in the end. In the end, Neo says,
Mhm.
"You were right, Smith. It was inevitable."
Right,
And
I like
to me,
that.
yeah, yeah, I always think about that when I think about confidential computing, and we spoke a lot about these adoption. We spoke a lot about, Web3 being a necessary component in order for Web3 to mature, just like it was a security and privacy was a necessary component for Web1 and Web2 to mature. And so if anybody remembers one thing about confidential computing from this conversation, I would say that privacy is a fundamental human nature. It's really baked into our DNA. It is what we use to establish, build trust. It is what we use to build relationships. And so confidential computing is an inevitability.
Right.
It's not a must. To me, it's an inevitability. It's gonna
It's gonna
happen.
happen.
It's gonna
Yeah,
happen. It is
I'm gonna
as
use that.
yeah, yeah. You
'Cause
have to you
I
have to
hear a
quote me.
lot from people. People argue a lot that people don't care about privacy. Why are you even doing this? Like, it's never gonna catch on. It's too inconvenient. But I'm gonna use this because I think this is a good answer. It's baked into how we view the world. Privacy
Yeah.
is just we expect privacy at the end
Mhm.
of the day, and so it's inevitable.
Yeah, it is baked into the history of our technology advancements in
Mhm.
multiple different technologies.
Yes.
Every
Mhm.
single technology always added a layer of privacy. Even envelopes, you have a envelope, that has a sealed
Mhm.
envelope, and so
Mm.
privacy is baked into the human nature. It
Yeah.
is an inevitability, and
Right.
yeah.
Great.
So
Well, it was great to talk to you, Bruce. Thank you. Really deep thinking about how Web3 it has evolved from other technologies and drawing analogies between how things have changed in the past to how you expect things to change in the future to how they are now. So it's been actually a fascinating conversation. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode.
Lisa, it was fantastic to talk to you again, and really appreciate the invite.